It didn't do it with teeth. It did it with sirens that bounced off metal walls and turned every alley into an echo chamber. With floodlights that sliced through steam like blades. With a kind of noise that made you forget which way was up. Trains groaning somewhere under. The concrete, vents hissing, generators throbbing like a heartbeat you couldn't escape. The lower levels never slept. They just breathed. Hot, dirty air rising from the ribs of the city, slipping between buildings, and up through cracks in the rooftops like it was hunting for a way out. Tonight, I was the way out. My boots hit the gravel of a service roof, sending pebbles skittering over the edge. I didn't look down. If I looked down, I'd see the glow bleeding up from the streets. Neon signs, cheap market lights, the occasional flare of a patrol drone, like the city had a second, hungry sky underneath my feet. I ran anyway. No time for questions. No time for the part of me that wanted to stop and demand a meeting with reality like, "Excuse me, why are we sprinting for our life at midnight?" Reality would just point at the floodlights and say, "Because you are, Gordon." I cut left onto a narrow walkway, 2 feet wide, rusted chain railing on one side, a drop on the other. This was my route. My favorite route. The kind of path you couldn't find on any official map because it wasn't supposed to exist. I knew every squeak of every bolt, every loose panel, every spot where the metal flexed and complained. These rooftops were mine the same way a river belongs to the fish that survives it. But tonight, the route didn't answer. It was subtle at first, a wrong vibration through the grate under my foot. The steam that usually rose in predictable bursts. Waited, then exhaled all at once, thick enough to blind me for half a second. Half a second in the lower levels was the difference between alive and caught. I swallowed a curse before it could turn into panic. If this story caught you, subscribe. More are waiting. I shouldn't be here. That thought landed in my head with the weight of a truth I hadn't wanted to pick up. I pushed harder, lungs burning, throat tasting like metal. Behind me, the city screamed. "Stop!" Someone shouted, amplified. Not a person, a system. A voice designed to make compliance feel inevitable. I didn't stop. I vaulted over a pipe that ran like a spine across the roof and landed on the other side in a crouch, hands scraping grime. My fingers came away damp. The air was warmer here. Closer to the vents. Closer to the city's breath. I darted forward again, taking the ladder up 2 levels, rungs slick with condensation, rust biting at my palms. The ladder rattled under my weight, loud enough to feel like a confession. A spotlight swung. I flattened against a wall, chest heaving, and watched the beam sweep across the roof I'd just left. It painted the steam gold. It turned every moving shadow into a suspect. I waited for footsteps. None came. That was the first time I felt him. Not a sound, not a shout, not even the click of a weapon. Just pressure. It pressed against my ribs like a hand, like the air had thickened and decided my lungs were optional, like someone behind me had stepped into the same space without ever touching me and my body had noticed before my eyes could. My throat went tight. My pulse stuttered, then kicked like a trapped thing. No. I knew that feeling the way you know thunder is coming before the sky decides to admit it. ARTHUR NOX. Head of patrol. The city's perfect hunter. The alpha they sent when they didn't want to chase. They wanted an ending. I'd never seen him up close. Nobody down here wanted to see him up close. There were stories about the way he moved through chaos like he'd designed it, about how he never wasted energy, never raised his voice, never ran unless it amused him. I'd laughed at those stories. Because what kind of person didn't run when someone was escaping? The kind who already knew where you were going. My stomach dropped. This path betrayed me. I pushed off the wall and ran again, faster. My route should have taken me to a gap between buildings, a clean jump, a steel beam you could land on. Then a maintenance hatch down into a service corridor that would spit me out 3 blocks away. 3 blocks away meant crowds. Crowds meant cover. Cover meant breathing. I reached the gap and didn't slow down. The wind hit my face. The steam thinned. For a heartbeat, everything went weightless. I jumped. and the city shifted. Not physically, not like the buildings moved, but the timing did. The vibration did. The invisible rhythm that my body had learned after years of running these rooftops, like a song you know so well you can hum it in your sleep. It was off. The beam I expected under my boot wasn't where it should have been. My foot hit air. There was a sharp, cold moment where my brain tried to rewrite physics. Like if I pretended hard enough, the beam would appear out of embarrassment. It didn't. I dropped. My fingers snatched at the edge of the far roof, nails biting metal. Pain flashed hot through my hand. My shoulder yanked. My stomach lurched up into my throat as my full weight swung beneath me. Below, the city glowed and snarled and waited. My feet kicked uselessly against blank space. The chain railing rattled. Somewhere far under, a train screamed through a tunnel like it was laughing. I gritted my teeth, trying to haul myself up. That was when the pressure behind me became a presence. A shadow fell over my hands. Not from a spotlight. From a person. I didn't look up. I didn't want to confirm it. Confirmation made things real. Real meant you had to decide what to do about it. I heard the quietest sound, fabric shifting, boots settling on metal, like the roof itself was making room. Then a hand closed around my wrist. Firm. Warm through my sleeve. Not yanking me, not hurting me, just owning the fact that I wasn't going anywhere. I froze, breath caught, muscles locked in mid-fight. A voice, low, calm, so close it felt like it was inside my lungs, said, "Gordon." Not a question, not a shout, a statement. And the worst part? He sounded like he'd been waiting all night for me to finally arrive. Arthur Knox didn't pull me up right away. That was the first thing that told me I was in trouble. He held my wrist like it weighed nothing. My body dangling over the city's open mouth. My shoulders screaming in protest. The metal edge dug into my fingers, but the pain stayed distant. My attention was too busy tracking the man behind me. I forced a breath through my teeth. It came out uneven. "Well," I said, because silence had always scared me more than falling. "This is awkward." "Nothing." His grip didn't tighten. Didn't loosen, just stayed, steady, certain, like gravity had decided to outsource its job. The pressure in my chest didn't fade. If anything, it settled in deeper, a quiet dominance that didn't need to announce itself. My lungs forgot the rhythm they'd known 5 minutes ago. My shoulders crept up toward my ears without my permission. I hated that my body noticed him before my brain could catch up. "Let me guess," I went on, voice light. A little breathless in a way I hoped sounded charming instead of terrified. "You're here to tell me this is all a misunderstanding, and escort me home." Still nothing. He didn't shift his stance. Didn't lean closer. Didn't say a word. The silence stretched. Not empty. Heavy. Intentional. It crawled under my skin. I swallowed. My throat tight. My pulse thudded hard enough that I felt it in my jaw. I was used to Alpha's posturing, flooding the air with pheromones like it was a weapon. Knox didn't do that. He didn't need to. Finally, he spoke. "Climb up," he said. No edge, no threat, just a simple instruction, delivered like he already knew I'd obey. I bristled on instinct. Wow. You rehearse that in the mirror, or does it come naturally? A pause. Not the kind where someone searches for words. The kind where they decide whether you're worth responding to at all. Then, finally, he pulled. One smooth motion. Controlled. He lifted me up and over the edge like I weighed less than my jacket, setting me on the rooftop with infuriating care. I stumbled back a step, boots scraping, and spun to face him. Arthur Knox was taller than I expected. Not bulky. Just built like nothing about him was wasted. Dark uniform, clean lines, no unnecessary armor. His presence filled the narrow rooftop, without him needing to spread out. His face was calm, not cold, not cruel, focused, like I was a problem he'd already solved, and now he was checking his work. I crossed my arms, mostly to give my shoulders something to do besides shake. "You know," I said, forcing a grin, "most people say hello before grabbing someone's wrist." He studied me for a moment. Really studied me. Not my clothes, not the city behind me. Me. "Hello, Gordon," he said. My stomach dropped. It wasn't the name. Plenty of people knew my name. It was the way he said it. Like he'd been holding on to it. Like it belonged in his mouth. I felt it then. Sharp and undeniable. They hadn't been chasing me blind. This wasn't a lucky catch. This wasn't a patrol stumbling onto the wrong rooftop at the right time. I'd been expected. "You're quiet for a man with this much backup," I said, glancing at the floodlights creeping closer, the distant boots now finally catching up. Thought the city's top hunter would enjoy the victory speech. Arthur Knox didn't smile. "I don't rush," he replied. He stepped closer. Not invading, not crowding. Just enough that the air between us changed. The pressure settled again, firm but restrained. Then he reached out, not to grab, not to restrain, to cuff me. The metal clicked shut around my wrist, cool and precise, no shove, no force. Just the simple, undeniable end of my run. As the patrol lights washed over the rooftop and hands took my other arm, one thought cut through the noise, clear and terrifying. I hadn't been caught. I'd been collected. The interrogation room smelled like nothing. No oil. No rust. No damp concrete. Just clean air recycled too many times. Scrubbed until it forgot where it came from. The walls were glass, transparent and useless at the same time. Designed so you could see everything and still feel completely alone. They sat me down in the center, cuffs clipped to a metal ring in the table. The chair was bolted to the floor. Even the light felt bolted, white, steady, unforgiving. I rolled my shoulders once, trying to shake off the tension that had settled there during the walk inside. It didn't move. My body was still tuned to the rooftops, waiting for a chance to run. Arthur Knox stood across from me, hands resting lightly on the back of the opposite chair. He didn't sit. He didn't pace. He didn't crowd my space. He just waited. I broke first. "So," I said, aiming for casual and landing somewhere near reckless, "do I get a lawyer? Or is this one of those we already know everything conversations?" His gaze didn't waver. "We already know enough." I snorted. "That's what everyone says right before they're spectacularly wrong." Silence again. That controlled, deliberate quiet that pressed against my skin like a held breath. Then he said it. "Your brother gave us the route." The words were simple, clean, precise. They hit like a misstep in the dark. I laughed. Short, sharp, wrong, no. He didn't. Arthur didn't react. Not even a flicker. "You're lying," I added, heat rising fast now. "You think because you caught me you get to rewrite my life? That's not how this works." He tilted his head just slightly. Not challenging. Assessing. "He didn't have a choice," Arthur said. Something ugly twisted in my chest. "You don't know him." "I know he's bonded," Arthur replied calmly, "and that his partner was flagged 3 weeks ago." The room seemed to tilt. The light grew teeth. "No," I said, too fast. "You're wrong. Because my brother, my idiot, soft-hearted, stubborn brother, would never do that. Not to me. Not after." Memory hit without asking permission. 2 kids running through the lower levels, barefoot and filthy, laughing so hard it hurt. Him shoving me ahead when patrol lights swept too close. Me memorizing routes so he didn't have to be scared. Us hiding under a collapsed platform, breathing dust and promises into each other's ears. "We don't sell each other out." He'd said it first. Pinky swear, solemn as a vow. I squeezed my eyes shut for half a second. When I opened them, Arthur was still there. Still calm. Still watching me like he wasn't trying to win anything. "He wouldn't," I said, quieter now. "He wouldn't trade me." Arthur didn't argue. That was worse. The anger came next. Hot and immediate, burning through my chest like it needed somewhere to go. I yanked against the cuffs, metal biting into my wrists. "You're lying," I snapped. "You needed a name, a face, someone expendable. That's what I am to you people." Arthur stepped closer to the table, not looming, just present. "You were a means," he said honestly, "not expendable." I barked a humorless laugh. Wow. Comforting. You were leverage, he continued. So was he. My stomach dropped. Leverage meant pressure. Pressure meant fear. And fear made people do things they swore they never would. Shame crept in behind the anger, quiet and corrosive. I pictured my brother backed into a corner, eyes wild, clutching his partner's hand like it was the last solid thing left in the city. I hated him for it. I hated myself for understanding. You could have said something, I muttered. You could have told me. Arthur shook his head once. He wasn't allowed. I looked up sharply. Allowed by who? His gaze held mine. Steady. Unflinching. The system you run from, he said. And the one I work inside. I waited for the accusation. For the judgment. For the moral high ground, delivered like a verdict. It never came. Arthur didn't call my brother a traitor. He didn't tell me betrayal was inevitable. He didn't even tell me to accept it. He just stood there, letting the truth exist between us. And somehow, that hurt more than if he'd shouted. Because if Arthur Nox, head of patrol, perfect hunter, could see the trap my brother had fallen into, then I had no one left to blame but the city itself. And for the first time since the cuffs closed around my wrists, I didn't know which scared me more. That my brother had sold my name, or that he might have done it to save someone he loved. The transit block sat between levels like a held breath. Not up, not down. Just a long reinforced corridor lined with sealed doors, humming softly as energy flowed through the walls. The air was cooler here, filtered but still carrying a faint metallic tang. Like the city reminding you it was never really clean. They walked me in without ceremony. The cuffs were gone, replaced by a thin restraint band that hummed against my wrist whenever I moved too fast. Polite, efficient, insulting. A guard took position by the door, Beta by the look of him. Square shoulders, blank expression, eyes trained anywhere but on me. He leaned against the wall like a piece of furniture someone had forgotten to throw out. Across the room, another Omega sat on a bench, legs stretched out, boots crossed at the ankles. A courier. I knew by the jacket, patched, reinforced at the seams, pockets in places. That only made sense if you ran routes no one else would touch. He looked me over slowly, eyes sharp, mouth curling into something that might have been a smile. Well, I'll be damned, he said. They finally caught you. Rumors of my capture have been greatly exaggerated, I replied, dropping onto the opposite end of the bench. I'm just touring. He snorted. Sure. With a tracker band and a personal escort, I lifted my wrist, letting the band glint under the lights. Limited edition. The guard didn't react, didn't blink. If he was listening, he was doing a good job pretending he wasn't. The courier leaned back, studying me like I was a puzzle he'd solved once and never quite forgotten. Didn't think you'd ever slip, he said. You're Gordon. I grimaced. I was hoping we'd moved past full name recognition. He laughed quietly. Lower levels don't forget. That much was true. Down here, reputation was currency. You didn't earn it by surviving once. You earned it by surviving every time and making it look easy. You ran the East Veins blind, he went on, shaking his head. No tags. No map. People still talk about that. They exaggerate, I said. I tripped twice. And lived, he shot back. That's the impressive part. I shrugged, heat creeping up my neck despite myself. I listened to the city. That's what they all say. No, I corrected. That's what they wish they could say. The courier's grin widened. Cocky. Experienced. The guard shifted his weight. The faint hum of my restraint band ticked up a notch, like a warning. I leaned back, stretching my legs out. Posture loose on purpose, relax. If I was going to make a break for it, this would be the least dramatic way possible. The courier eyed the guard, then me. So, he said quietly. Is it true? Define true. That Nox himself caught you. I huffed a laugh. Trust me. I'm just as offended as you are. That earned me a sharp bark of laughter. Damn, he said. Didn't think the top alpha hunted ghosts personally. Apparently, I was worth the exercise. He studied me for a long moment, the humor fading into something more thoughtful. You know what happens to people who get dragged upstairs? I did. The city chewed you up differently depending on where you were standing when it decided you were in the way. I'll manage, I said lightly. The guard finally spoke, voice flat. Time. I stood as the door slid open, the corridor beyond glowing brighter, cleaner, more controlled. The courier gave me a nod. Don't let them turn you into a cautionary tale. I smirked. Please. I'm more of a footnote. As I stepped forward, I felt it again. Not the pressure this time, but the certainty. The lower levels didn't forgive, but they remembered, and whatever Arthur Nox thought he'd collected. I wasn't done playing yet. The metro breathed in cycles. If you listened long enough, you could feel it. Power surging through the rails, pressure, building. The low hum before a train tore through the dark like a pulse through an artery. The lower levels moved because the metro moved. Everything else just clung to it. They transferred me, during a maintenance window. Official reason, relocation to a secured holding sector. Real reason, someone thought underground would keep me contained. I walked between two guards, restraint band quiet against my wrist, boots echoing softly along the platform. The lights here were half dead, flickering like they couldn't decide if visibility was worth the effort. Far down the tunnel, something metallic screamed, and then went silent. Perfect. I counted steps without looking like I was counting. 7 to the cracked pillar, 12 to the signal panel that hadn't been replaced in a decade, 23 to the shadow where the light never quite reached. The first train was late. That was fine. Late meant pressure. Pressure meant mistakes. I rolled my shoulders, letting my head dip like I was tired, defeated, another Omega being marched somewhere unpleasant. The guard on my left relaxed half an inch. The one on my right adjusted his grip on my arm. I waited for the hum. There it was, a vibration under my boots, familiar as my own heartbeat. Now, I whispered to myself. I twisted my wrist just enough to spike the restraint band. It shrieked, loud and sharp, drawing attention like a flare. Both guards reacted at once, hands tightening, focus snapping to the band. I dropped. Literally. I folded at the knees and slipped out of their grip, shoulder slamming into the left guard's thigh. He swore, stumbling. The right one reached for me, and missed as I rolled into the shadow beside the pillar. The train roared in. Wind tore down the platform, drowning out shouts, ripping loose debris into the air. I ran low, sprinting along the blind side of the tracks, boots splashing through puddles I'd memorized years ago. Behind me, alarms screamed. Patrol lights flared, scattering through the tunnel like panicked fireflies. I smiled as I ran. I ducked into a maintenance hatch just as the train thundered past, heat and noise swallowing the space. The hatch slammed shut behind me, plunging everything into darkness. I didn't slow. The tunnel beyond was narrow, ribbed with cables and old pipes, the kind of place maps pretended didn't exist. I followed the curve by feel, fingers brushing concrete, counting turns in my head. Left, down, crawl, up. Voices echoed somewhere behind me. Disorganized, overlapping. Good. They burst into the wrong tunnel, 2 turns back. I heard it in the way their boots hit metal too fast, the way commands overlapped instead of stacking cleanly. The patrol had lost me. I climbed a ladder into a service platform, rolling out just as another train screamed past on the adjacent track. I pressed flat against the wall, chest heaving, the air thick with oil and heat. For a moment, a dangerous, beautiful moment, I let myself believe it. Then the pressure settled in. Not sudden, not violent, certain. I went still. You favor the maintenance lines, a voice said calmly from the darkness. Always have. I closed my eyes. Arthur Nox stepped into the half-light like he'd been there the whole time. No running, no visible hurry. His uniform was pristine, his breathing steady, his presence filling the platform without effort. You let them chase the noise, I said, forcing a grin that felt brittle around the edges. Very efficient. They needed to learn, he replied. You needed to run. I swallowed. You could have stopped me. Yes. The word landed heavy. And yet, I said, pulse hammering, Here we are. He studied me, not with frustration, not with triumph, but with something close to approval. You move well, Arthur said, but you don't improvise when the city goes quiet. I bristled. I improvise all the time. You adapt, he corrected. Improvisation is something else. I laughed softly. Is this the part where you congratulate me before slapping cuffs on? He didn't answer. He stepped closer, slow enough that I could track every inch, pressure building, in my chest again, steady and grounding and infuriating all at once. I knew you'd take this route, Arthur said. You always come here when you think you've disappeared. My smile faded. You didn't follow me, I said quietly. You waited. He held my gaze. The metro runs like veins, he said. You don't chase blood. You intercept it. He reached out. This time, I didn't flinch. The cuffs closed with a soft click, almost gentle. And as he guided me back toward the light, I realized something that made my stomach twist worse than fear ever had. This wasn't a loss. This was the second move in a game ARTHUR NOX had been playing long before I decided to run. The transport car was quiet in the way expensive things always were. Smooth walls, soft lighting, no windows. The restraints were back, light enough to be insulting, humming faintly whenever I shifted my weight. ARTHUR NOX stood near the door, one hand braced against the wall as the vehicle slid through the city's veins. No guards, no audience. That, more than anything, made my skin itch. I leaned back against the seat and studied him like I might find a crack if I stared long enough. You know, I said, breaking the silence, for a guy with your reputation, you're really bad at stopping people. Arthur glanced at me, expression unreadable. Am the first? You caught me twice, I went on, which means you could have caught me the first time, or the second I stepped into the metro, or… I tilted my head. Never let me get that far at all. He didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself, just listened. That was becoming a pattern. So, I finished lightly. Why are you letting me run? The transport hummed. Somewhere beneath us, the city shifted. Arthur turned fully toward me, not looming, not retreating, just present. Because watching how you run tells me more than stopping you. I scoffed. What, like a performance review? Like a map, he replied. My smile twitched. Careful, flattery gets you everywhere. His gaze held mine, steady and unsettling. You don't panic, he said. You calculate. You don't choose the fastest route. You choose the one people forget. I shrugged, heat creeping up my neck despite myself. I'm allergic to being predictable. You favor routes that don't look safe, Arthur continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Because the system avoids them. I let out a soft laugh. Congratulations. You've discovered my entire career. He ignored the sarcasm, which tells me you don't trust authority. Well spotted. And that you don't run unless you have to. That landed harder. I shifted, the restraint band humming in quiet protest. You sound disappointed. No, Arthur said. Relieved. I frowned. That's not ominous at all. He turned back toward the wall, giving me his profile. If you were reckless, this would be simpler. Simpler for who? For me. The air changed. Not heavier, sharper. You're not the primary objective, Arthur said. I laughed. The sound brittle. Wow. I feel so special. Your leverage, he corrected, calm and unflinching. Which means someone else is under more pressure than you. My chest tightened. I stared at the floor, then back at him. My brother. Arthur didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. He's not free, Arthur said instead. Not in the way you think. I clenched my jaw. You said that before. Yes. And you're still not telling me why. Arthur met my gaze again. And for the first time, something like weariness flickered through his control. Because if I tell you everything now, he said, you'll stop running. The transport slowed. The hum dropped to pitch. And you need me running, I said quietly. For a little longer, Arthur replied. I swallowed. You're using me. Yes. The honesty knocked the air out of me more effectively than any threat. But not the way you think, he added. Silence stretched between us, tense and vibrating with things unsaid. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. You know what the worst part is? I said lightly. If you were lying, I'd be angrier. Arthur said nothing, which meant he knew exactly what I meant. As the transport came to a smooth stop, doubt settled in my chest like a hairline fracture, small, almost invisible, and impossible to ignore. For the first time since the rooftops, I wondered if running wasn't keeping me free, it was keeping me useful. The patrol's closed node felt nothing like the rest of the city. No steam, no vibration, no distant roar of trains or markets bleeding into the walls. The air was still, climate-controlled, neutral to the point of erasure, like a room designed to make you forget the world existed outside it. The door sealed behind us with a sound too soft to be reassuring. Arthur Nox didn't gesture for me to sit. He didn't restrain me, either. The band on my wrist went quiet the moment we crossed the threshold, as if even it knew better than to misbehave here. Comfortable? I asked, glancing around at the smooth walls and embedded screens. You really know how to make a guy feel welcome. Arthur tapped a panel. The glass wall to my left flickered, then came alive with layered data, names, timestamps, biometric tags, routes, flags, red markers blooming across the map like infections. This is why, he said. I followed his gaze despite myself. The city's lower levels unfolded in stark lines and grids. Dots pulsed where patrols intersected with courier routes. When two dots overlapped, a thin line snapped into place between them. Pairs. My stomach sank. You see a crackdown, Arthur continued. Random stops. Increased patrols. Administrative audits. He glanced at me. You assume it's about control. It is about control, I said. Yes, he agreed. But not primarily about movement. He expanded the view. Names slid into focus. Omegas, betas, some alphas. Beside many of them, bond markers. They target bonds, Arthur said, not individuals. I felt cold. Pairs create leverage, he went on. You pressure one, the other complies. You threaten access, housing, work permits. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Or you flag a partner as unstable. I looked back at the screen, at the web of lines tightening around certain names like a noose. You're telling me the city's running on hostage logic. I'm telling you it's efficient, Arthur replied, and invisible to anyone who isn't looking for it. My voice came out sharp. And my brother? Arthur brought up a new layer. There it was, my brother's name. Is bond status. A red marker pulsing steadily beside it. Flagged, not arrested, not charged. Held. The room seemed to shrink around my ribs. He's not in a cell, Arthur said quietly. He's in limbo, restricted movement, conditional access to healthcare for his partner, reviews that never resolve. I clenched my fists. So you leaned on him until he cracked? No, Arthur said. The system did. I spun on him. You're part of that system. Yes. The word was calm, unflinching. And you're just standing here, I snapped, telling me this like it's a weather report. Arthur met my glare without backing down. I'm standing here because this node isn't monitored the way the others are. That made me pause. I built it that way, he continued. Blind spots, gaps in reporting, places where information can exist without immediately becoming a weapon. I laughed, harsh and humorless. You expect me to believe you're some kind of hero now? No, Arthur said. I expect you to believe I'm careful. He stepped closer to the display, highlighting several routes, mine among them. I don't dismantle the system by charging at it, he said. I pull threads, I collect patterns, I wait. I stared at the map, at the way my routes intersected with flagged pairs, with pressure points. With me, I said slowly. Yes, I exhaled sharply. So that's why you let me run. Arthur nodded. You draw attention. You expose movement. You make the system react. And my brother pays the price. Not if this works. I turned fully toward him, heart hammering. You want my help. I want your cooperation, Arthur corrected. Voluntary. I barked a laugh. You're joking. He shook his head. I won't force you. I can't. Not here. Not like this. Why? I demanded. Because forced compliance produces predictable behavior, Arthur said. And I need unpredictability. I stared at him, searching for the lie, for the threat hiding under the calm. What do I get? I asked finally. Access, he said. Information. The ability to protect your brother without turning him into a larger target. And you? I get a courier who understands the city better than any system map ever could. The offer hung between us, heavy and sharp-edged. I thought of the rooftops, the metro, the way he'd waited instead of chased. I thought of my brother's name, pulsing red on the screen. Then I shook my head. No, Arthur didn't react. I don't work for patrol, I said, voice steady despite the crack in my chest. I don't become part of your strategy. And I don't trust a system that eats its own and calls it order. Arthur studied me for a long moment. Not angry, not disappointed, interested. Very well, he said. He tapped the panel. The display dimmed. But understand this, Gordon, Arthur added quietly. Refusing doesn't remove you from the board. I met his gaze, heart pounding. I never thought it would. As the door slid open and the noise of the city rushed back in, one truth settled deep and uncomfortable in my gut. I hadn't just said no to Arthur Knox. I'd said no to the illusion that I could outrun a system designed to chase everything I loved. They moved me back into holding, but it wasn't the same. Same walls, same filtered air, same quiet hum beneath everything. And yet my body refused to settle, nerves buzzing like the city had rewired me when I wasn't looking. I paced the length of the room, bare feet slapping softly against the floor. 5 steps. Turn. 5 steps back. The restraint band stayed dark and silent, which somehow made it worse. It meant they were watching in ways I couldn't feel. I hated him. The thought came sharp and familiar, a reflex I could grab onto. I hated Arthur Knox for his calm, for his honesty, for the way he'd laid the city open like a body on a table and expected me to look. I hated the system more, but underneath that, quiet and unwelcome, was something else. A pull. Not instinct, not chemistry, not the fairy tale version people like to sell about alphas and omegas finding their match. This was attention, being seen with uncomfortable precision. My chest tightened at the memory of his voice in the closed node, steady and infuriatingly reasonable, of the way he hadn't tried to corner me when I said no. My stomach twisted. Fear followed close behind, coiling low and ugly. Not the fear of being hurt, the fear of being understood and still used anyway. I stopped pacing and leaned forward, bracing my hands on my knees, breathing, hard like I'd just run 10 flights instead of thinking too much. My hands were shaking. That scared me more than cuffs ever had. Get it together, I muttered to myself. You're not 12. Humor helped. Usually. Congratulations, I told the empty room. You've officially met the alpha who makes you question your life choices. Collect all 5 and get a free existential crisis. My laugh came out wrong. Too thin. I straightened and rubbed my palms against my thighs, trying to ground myself in something physical. The city was good at that, giving you pain you could measure, fear you could outrun. This wasn't that. This was standing still while someone asked you to decide who you were when no one was forcing you. And that was terrifying. I closed my eyes and pictured the rooftops, the narrow paths, the split second, choices, the comfort of knowing that if I misstepped, it was on me. Running had rules. Running made sense. Choosing didn't. Choosing meant risk without momentum, risk without the illusion of control. It meant admitting that my brother hadn't betrayed me because he was weak, but because the city had taught him that love was a liability. It meant admitting that Arthur Knox wasn't lying when he said the system didn't care who it crushed, as long as it kept moving. And worst of all, it meant admitting that part of me wanted to believe him. My chest tightened again, sharp enough to make me hiss. Not desire, not longing, recognition. I hated that too. I dragged a hand down my face and blew out a breath. Trust is a bad habit, I said aloud, as if the walls might argue. Trust got you tracked, mapped, used as leverage. Trust got your name sold. I sank onto the bench, elbows on my knees, head bowed. My body finally slowed, but the tension stayed coiled in my shoulders, ready to snap. Running was easier. Running meant I didn't have to look at red markers on a screen, didn't have to weigh someone else's strategy against my own scars. Running meant I only had to save myself. I laughed softly, bitter and tired. Yeah, I murmured. And look how well that's going. The city hummed around me, patient as ever. And for the first time, I wondered, not for the system, not for Arthur Knox, but for myself. If running had ever really been freedom, or if it had just been the safest way to avoid choosing. The lower transport hub was chaos by design, too many levels converging in one place. Freight lines, passenger rails, service tunnels stacked like bad decisions. The lights flickered in uneven rhythms, some bright enough to hurt, others dead entirely. Sound bounced where it shouldn't, footsteps echoing from directions that made no sense. If the city wanted something to disappear, this was where it sent it. They brought me in under guard, restraint band humming softly, Arthur Knox walking a half step behind me. Not close enough to touch, not far enough to pretend he wasn't there. That alone told me something was wrong. The plan, his plan, had been quiet containment, controlled movement, no spectacle. This felt like a stage. I felt it before I saw it, the air tightening, the way the city's breath stuttered. My shoulders went rigid, nerves screaming. This isn't right, I muttered. Arthur's gaze flicked sideways to me, sharp, focused. Explain. The flow's off, I said under my breath. Too many patrol signals in one place. They're clustering. As if summoned by my words, boots thundered down an upper ramp. Floodlights snapped on. Drones buzzed to life overhead, their red optics sweeping the hub. The restraint band on my wrist spiked. Arthur swore, quietly, viciously. That's not your plan, I said. No, he replied flatly. A voice boomed over the hub's speakers, amplified and anonymous. All units, converge. Target is non-compliant. Target, me. Arthur stepped forward, his presence sharpening, voice cutting clean through the noise. Stand down, he ordered. This operation is under my authority. No one listened. Shots cracked, not aimed at me, but close enough to send a message. Concrete exploded in a spray of dust. People screamed. Civilians scattered, dropping bags, tripping over each other as panic spread like fire. This is a sweep, I said, pulse hammering. They're escalating. They weren't authorized, Arthur snapped, eyes tracking movement on the upper levels. This wasn't approved. So your bosses decided to improvise, I shot back. That usually ends well. Another blast tore through a service railing. Shrapnel clanged across the floor. Arthur turned on his comm, voice cold and absolute. Pull back. Now. Static. Then a reply. Too calm, too rehearsed. Negative. Command override in effect. Arthur's jaw tightened. For the first time I saw the cost of standing where he stood, between a system that demanded obedience and people who didn't deserve to be crushed under it. They're burning you, I said quietly. Yes, he replied. They are. A drone dipped low, scanning. The restraint band flared, locking my muscles just long enough to make my vision blur. Arthur moved without hesitation. He stepped in front of me, hand braced against my chest, his body a shield as the drone's optics recalibrated. Arthur, I said sharply. You're not bulletproof. No, he said. But I'm responsible. That did it. Something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, decisive break. Let me go, I said. Arthur didn't look at me. I can't. You already did, I snapped. Every time you let me run, another shot rang out. The crowd surged, screaming. The hub's rhythm collapsed into raw panic. Arthur, I said again, louder now. If you don't let me move, they win. He hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. It was enough. I slammed my wrist against the edge of a broken console, hard. Pain flared white hot. The restraint band shrieked and went dark, overwhelmed by conflicting signals. I wrenched free and ran. Not away. Toward the heart of the hub. "Gordon," Arthur shouted. I vaulted over a fallen barrier, boots hitting concrete as I sprinted for a service ramp the patrol had ignored. Drones pivoted, confused by the sudden shift. "Left," I yelled, pointing sharply. "They'll bottleneck there." Arthur didn't question it. He moved. That was new. He barked orders, redirecting his people, not the sweep units, but the ones who still answered to him. They followed, forming a loose wedge that cut through the chaos instead of adding to it. I led them through blind zones, across maintenance bridges, into spaces the city forgot as soon as you stepped out of them. Patrol fire faltered, their formation collapsing as they lost visual and signal cohesion. "They're separating," Arthur said, breath steady even now. "They always do," I replied. "The city hates symmetry." A final burst of gunfire echoed behind us, then faded. We burst into a sealed corridor, Arthur slamming the manual lock just as the doors ground shut. Silence crashed down, sudden and complete. I bent over, hands on my knees, lungs burning. Arthur stared at me, not angry, not triumphant, something else. Something like recalibration. "You chose to help," he said. I straightened, meeting his gaze. "Don't get sentimental. I chose to survive." A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Outside the sealed doors, alarms wailed and systems screamed as the city tried to correct itself. Inside, for the first time, we stood side by side. And I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever game Arthur Knox had been playing alone, it wasn't a solo operation anymore. There's a moment, right before you run, when your body leans forward without asking you. I felt it start. The sealed corridor vibrated faintly as alarms echoed through the walls. The city trying to reroute itself around the damage we'd just done. My lungs burned. My hands shook. Every instinct I had screamed the same familiar command. Move. Disappear. Survive. I straightened instead. Arthur Knox watched me closely, like he could see the fork in the road before I named it. "We can still get you out," he said. "Right now." I exhaled slowly. "I know." And didn't move. That got his attention. "The hub's compromised," Arthur continued. "Command will lock this sector down. Hard. If you run now, you might make it." "Might." I shook my head. "They won't stop with me." Silence fell between us, dense and electric. "You said my brother's not in a cell," I went on. "You said he's in limbo." "Yes." "Then he's still in the system." Arthur's jaw tightened. "Gordon, that means he's still mapped," I cut in. "Tracked, categorized. And that means—" I glanced at the wall, at the faint pulse of data bleeding through the infrastructure. "That means the city still knows where he is." Arthur followed my gaze. Understanding dawned slowly and sharply. "You want to go back in," he said. "I want to go through," I replied. "There's a difference." He studied me for a long second. No pressure. No command. Just assessment. "This won't be clean," Arthur said finally. "If we do this, there's no plausible deniability. No quiet corrections." I smiled, thin and tired. "Good." He nodded once. "Decision made. Then we do it properly," Arthur said, already moving. "Show me." We dropped into the city's underlayer through a maintenance shaft that hadn't been officially logged in years. The air changed immediately. Hotter, thicker, alive with vibrations. My skin prickled as the familiar hum settled into my bones. This was my territory. I moved first, not running, choosing. I led us through service corridors that bent logic, through junctions, where signals overlapped just enough to confuse automated tracking. I timed our movement to the city's pulses, freight surges, power shifts, train cycles syncing and breaking like breathing patterns. "Now," I murmured, stepping aside as a data relay spiked. Arthur didn't question it. He moved when I moved, covered when I paused, trusted without asking why. That, more than anything, fueled me. We reached a control spur overlooking a restricted residential block. On Arthur's wrist display, the system bloomed into view, red markers clustering, tightening. "There," I said, pointing. That's not a cell. That's containment by access. Arthur's fingers flew over the interface. If I override, they'll notice, I finished. Immediately, I closed my eyes, listening to the city. The hum deepened. The rhythm shifted. There's an old emergency reroute, I said, built back when the lower levels still flooded. It'll spike resource allocation for 90 seconds. That's not enough time, Arthur said. It is, if you don't move like they expect. I didn't wait for permission. I slammed my palm against the manual panel, shorting it with a move I'd learned at 16 and never thought I'd use again. The system shrieked in protest as power surged sideways instead of forward. The city stuttered. Arthur seized the opening, overriding containment protocols with surgical precision. Red markers flickered. One blinked yellow, then green. I sucked in a sharp breath. That's him. We moved fast, not reckless, focused. We cut through corridors that weren't meant for patrol boots, ducked through living spaces, where people stared and didn't ask questions because questions got you flagged. I felt the system recalibrating around us, alarms shifting pitch, as it tried to decide what kind of emergency this was. We reached the unit just as security doors began to slide shut. Arthur forced them apart with raw strength, teeth gritted, muscles screaming. I slipped through, heart in my throat. My brother looked up from the corner of the room, eyes wide and exhausted. Gordon? He whispered. For a split second, the past tried to crash in. Anger, betrayal, all of it. I pushed it aside. Move, I said, grabbing his arm. Now, we ran. Together. The system fought back, doors sealing, lights cutting out. But the city was already off balance. Every step we took widened the crack, made the illusion of control harder to maintain. By the time we burst into open air, alarms howling behind us, something fundamental had shifted. The city hadn't swallowed me. It had choked. Arthur stood beside me, chest heaving, gaze fixed on the chaos spreading through the network feeds. This will have consequences, he said quietly. I nodded. Good. For the first time since my name had been sold, I wasn't running. I wasn't obeying. I was standing in the middle of the city's bloodstream, fists clenched, heart pounding. And I'd fought back. And the system was bleeding. The fallout didn't arrive like an explosion. It came like gravity, slow, inescapable, pulling everything back into place whether it wanted to or not. We didn't get far before the city caught its breath. Not with sirens this time, not with drones swarming the sky, but with silence. Systems locking down. Channels going dark. The kind of quiet that meant decisions were being made somewhere above our pay grade. Arthur felt it before I did. They've suspended my access, he said calmly, eyes flicking over a dead display on his wrist. Effective immediately. I winced. That bad, huh? He huffed something that might have been a laugh. Worse, they'll call it procedural misconduct. Overreach, endangerment of assets. Assets, I echoed, flat. Yes. We found shelter in a forgotten service bay overlooking the lower rails. My brother sat on a crate, shoulders hunched, hands shaking as he stared at the floor. He looked thinner than I remembered. Older, like the city had carved pieces out of him while I wasn't looking. He didn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely. I didn't. I held up a hand. Not yet, I said gently. You don't get to rush this. He flinched, then nodded. Fair. Arthur gave us space, standing near the open bay door, watching the city with the focus of someone who no longer belonged to the system he'd served. He'll be alive, Arthur said quietly, not turning around. But they'll watch him. Closely. And you? I asked. He shrugged. They'll make an example of me. Quietly, if possible. The words settled heavy between us. You regret it? I asked. Arthur turned then, meeting my gaze. No. No hesitation, no qualification. That surprised me more than anything. My brother finally looked up, eyes glassy. You didn't have to do that, he whispered. For me, I crossed the distance between us and crouched in front of him. Yeah, I said softly. I did. We sat like that for a moment. 3 people caught in the aftershock of a choice the city hadn't approved. Arthur broke the silence. "This is where I step back," he said. "You don't owe me anything." I snorted. "Careful. You're dangerously close to sounding noble." A corner of his mouth twitched. "I'm resigning." That wiped the humor right off my face. "You're serious? I can't fix a system from the inside if it's already decided I'm expendable," he said. "And I won't pretend otherwise." I studied him, really studied him, and saw something raw beneath the control. Not defeat. Clarity. "So what now?" I asked. Arthur met my gaze, steady as ever. "That depends on what you choose. No promises. No claims. No talk of destiny or instincts or bonds. Just choice." I exhaled slowly. "My brother needs time. And space." Arthur nodded. "I expected that. And I don't trust easy alliances," I added. "Especially not after tonight." Wise. "But," I continued, heart thudding, "I'm done running." The words felt solid in my mouth. Arthur's eyes softened. Just a fraction. "So am I." We stood there, the city humming below us, broken in places it hadn't been before. The future wasn't clean or safe, but it was ours to choose. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The city didn't fall. That was the first thing I noticed. No grand collapse, no righteous purge, no dramatic moment where the lights went out and everyone cheered like they'd been waiting for permission to breathe. The city just kept going. Trains screamed through tunnels like they always had. Markets reopened in the lower levels with the same stubborn efficiency. Patrol routes shifted, tightened in some places, loosened in others. The system adapted, patched its wounds, pretended it hadn't bled, which meant it was still dangerous. But it also meant it was still alive. I stood on a rooftop that wasn't on any official map, wind tugging at my jacket. The city stretching out below in layers of light and shadow. This time, I wasn't counting exits. I wasn't scanning for drones or plotting angles of escape. I was just standing. That alone felt like rebellion. Arthur leaned against the low wall beside me. Jacket open. No uniform. No insignia, marking him as anything other than a man who knew the city too well. He didn't carry himself like a hunter anymore. No coiled readiness. No constant calculation. Just awareness. "They'll rebuild the protocols," he said quietly. "Rebrand them. Call it reform." "Of course they will," I replied. "Wouldn't want to waste a perfectly good scandal." He glanced at me. "You sound almost fond." "Don't push it." Below us a train roared past, wind spiraling up the side of the building. The city breathed in, breathed out. My brother was safe, for now. Watching him learn how to exist without a countdown hanging over his head was harder than any chase I'd ever run. Healing was slow, awkward, full of silence, but it was real. "So," I said, rocking back on my heels, former head of patrol. "What's the plan?" Arthur shrugged. "I'm taking a job with a transit oversight collective." I blinked. "You're kidding." "No." I stared at him, then laughed. "You went from running the city to checking maintenance schedules? They need someone who knows where the blind spots are," he said mildly, "and how to keep them from being used as weapons." I shook my head, grinning despite myself. "The city has no idea what it just signed up for." He returned the smile, small, genuine. "Neither do they." We stood there in companionable silence, the kind that didn't demand explanations or promises. There was no claim between us. No roles pressing in from either side. Just two people who'd seen behind the curtain and decided not to pretend they hadn't. "You know," I said after a moment, "this is usually where stories like ours get messy." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Messier than this?" "Fair point." I glanced at the city, then back at him. "I'm staying in the lower levels, running routes, but on my terms." I suspected as much, "and if you try to hunt me again," I added lightly, "I will absolutely make you regret it." He chuckled. "I don't hunt anymore." "Good," I said. "I'm terrible prey." The wind picked up, carrying the city's noise with it. Laughter, engines, distant music, life, stubborn and uncontained. I took a deep breath and let it fill my lungs without fear. The city still breathed. And this time, so did I. I glanced at Arthur and smirked. Guess I finally figured it out. Figured what out? He asked. I looked out over the city, feeling the hum beneath my feet. Familiar, dangerous, alive. That running is great, I said. But standing your ground? I smiled. That's where the view really gets interesting.